But I came back yesterday from Israel. I'm very happy to be back here. But still talking about the subject. And obviously today talking about the march, about the subject and what else it's about. Let me just start off with a little reflection. I spoke to a guy called Avi Isacharov a couple of days ago in Tel Aviv. He's one of the co-writers and founders, if you like, co-creators of a Netflix drama called Fauda, which is the Arab and Hebrew word for chaos. Now, it's really good because it treats both Palestinians and Israelis, whether they're in Hamas or in Shin Bet, or Mossad, or just ordinary civilians, as human beings. So there are goodies and baddies. There are people on both sides who are both good and bad. And of course, this sort of humanization of the conflict is something that is often lost in the current very tribal debate. Anyway, so I talked to Avi and I said, what about this attack on the October the 7th? And he said, we had a meeting about a year ago where we kind of tried to imagine what the next series of Fauda would be like. And one of my guys came up and said, why don't we have 10 Hamas fighters crossing the security fence from Gaza into Israel and killing a few people, but also taking mainly soldiers hostage from the IDF. And Avi said, I then interrupted and said, don't waste my time. This is never going to happen. That fence is incredibly secure. No one will ever spill over it. This is just unrealistic. And the whole point of Fauda is that it's based in verisimilitude. It's based in realism. And this is an unrealistic scenario. On October the 7th, Avi woke up, all hell was breaking loose, and the very worst nightmare scenario that he thought would never be possible happened times 1,000. Now, why do I say this? I say this because as someone who spent 5 weeks in Israel and was unable to get into Gaza, where I've been many times before, but unable to get in because the Israelis didn't want us there for obvious reasons. If you underestimate the degree of resilience and determination to uproot Hamas, if you underestimate the sense of trauma caused by the death of 1,400 mainly civilians because of Hamas's brutality on the 7th of October, you are misreading this crisis. At the same time, if you are underestimating the trauma of, is it 11,000 now? I lose count. 11,000 mainly civilians killed by indiscriminate aerial bombardment of 4,400 kids, or was it 4,500 kids? You are underestimating what this will do to Palestinian society, what this will do to Gaza. And all I hope is that at the end of this, and there are a few Palestinians and Israelis who've told me this, but I think maybe they are sort of optimists in the wilderness. All I hope is that this has been so bad that there might be some kind of meeting of minds, some realization that you cannot carry on with Middle Eastern politics or Israeli politics or British and American politics with the Palestinians being out of sight and out of mind. And at the same time, Israel cannot carry on being a democracy of sorts for itself without some kind of realization that they need to share the same bit of real estate with the people that they have grown to hate and who hate them. It's a bit like imagining this, it sounds slightly trite, but bear with me. It's a bit like a very, very bitter divorce, and the couple are still having to share the same flat, which has one bathroom and one kitchen, and neither side can move out, and you are stuck together. This is the image that Amos Elon, a very famous, brilliant Israeli writer who's sadly dead now, once told me when I lived in Israel in 1989. I went to see him. He lived in a place called Arad on the edge of the Negev desert, high above the Dead Sea. And that's the kind of image that he came up with. And I think that still holds true. We're dealing with almost 10 million Israelis and just over 5 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. There has to be some arrangement. Otherwise, the cycle of violence continues. And I think whoever is tempted out there to rip down the poster of a hostage, whoever is tempted, to burn the Palestinian flag, just remember that. This is actually more about them than it is about you. And we'll get to that. I'm fascinated by the idea that there is more anger here on the streets of London than there is on many Arab streets about what's going on. What is that really about? We will unpack all of this. And of course, we'll start off with the question about Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who seems to have, weaponized this crisis, today's march. To what end, I wonder? But it's certainly weaponized it has been. Let's talk to Robert Shrimsley, one of the best writers on British politics at the moment, chief columnist for the Financial Times. Robert, it's good to have you on the programme.
Hello, Matt. Good to be here.
Suella Braverman, what's she up to?
Oh, I mean, it's very simple. I mean, Suella Braverman is attempting to ensure her place as the right-wing candidate in the Tory leadership election, which most people assume will follow a general election defeat. And she's very, very focused on that.
Is there any competition for that? And if she did indeed, if there was a leadership contest, perhaps even before the election, who knows? What chance does she have of winning it?
Well, it's an interesting question because I would have said until 8 or 9 months ago that the contest to be the candidate of the right in a future Tory leadership contest would be between her and Kemi Badenoch, the business secretary. But actually, some space has opened up between them because in her time as a senior cabinet minister, Kemi Badenoch has shown some of those ministerial, virtues, like being ready to compromise when the facts are in the way of your ideas, as she did over some of the Brexit legislation, just saying, we're not quite ready to do this. It's going to take a bit more time. We have to think this one through a bit more. I'm not suggesting she's not still a fairly right-wing member of the Conservative Party, but that degree of moderation that comes from actually having to run departments. And that doesn't always play well with the most ideological figures. I think Suella Braverman has opened up space to be the right-wing candidate. But the question is whether in doing so, she's made herself so unpalatable to the rest of the Conservative Party that it becomes problematic. But ordinarily, the candidate, not always, but the candidate of the right tends to win in Conservative leadership elections. So the issue is whether somebody else can be right enough, as it were, to prevent that. The other thing that we just can't know, Matt, is what the state of the Conservative Party will be after a general election. And obviously, the MPs have the first choice in narrowing a list of candidates down to 2. So if it's a really bad defeat, lots of people will have gone and our calculations will need to be recalibrated.
Indeed. Do you think that Suella Braverman wished that she had been sacked by Rishi Sunak a few days ago?
It's a really good question. My instinct has always been not. I think her approach is to be that while she's not afraid of being sacked, I think her approach is to be as outspoken as she can possibly be from within the government. It is easier to win the leadership from a role in cabinet or having just been in cabinet. But what she is doing, rather brilliantly in a way, is running against her own department. I mean, she's standing up all the time, criticising all the things that she is responsible for: the police, the immigration service. And one might almost forget that she was the Home Secretary. And has some notional responsibility for all these things. But whenever you hear her speaking, it's about all the things that aren't working in the areas that she's responsible for. And if you can carry on in that way, you have the senior position, you have the cabinet post, but you're not going to get blamed for things that go wrong because you spent your whole time criticising them. That's quite a comfortable position.